Hi everyone and welcome back to the Procurement and Finance Coffee Break. I'm Clair Green, your finance transformation expert, and we're here with Richard Beaumont, procurement guru. And today we're joined by Donal Bourke, who's FinOps lead. We're going to have an interesting discussion about IT costs and cloud computing. Donal, thanks for joining us. So, Donal, before we dive into questions, perhaps you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and the services offered by Spot by NetApp and a little bit about what you do.
Sure thing, Claire, and thanks for having me. So I, like yourself, I'm an accountant by trade. I trained at one of the big four accountancy firms many moons ago, and after that I worked as an accountant in industry for 10 years across a variety of industries. I like to say I went from spuds to drugs. So I was the accountant for a potato plantation in rural South Australia, all the way to being an accountant for a revenue analyst for a US multinational pharmaceutical distributor. So a lot of different variety there. Until about 2020, when the finance function in Cork was shut down and we were all made redundant, and that gave me an opportunity to take a long hard look at myself and say, did I want to do journal entries and balance sheet recs anymore? And the answer was a resounding no. So I'd started kind of looking at using kind of big data and some tooling around that and around some visualization tools. And I found that quite interesting, that it was slightly more forward-looking than finance, where you're kind of giving your monthly or your quarterly readouts. It's more looking ahead. So I moved into sourcing analytics, which ties in with Richard's area. We're working with procurement in that function, where we're looking at the data that's in the business and trying to provide the sourcing managers with information to make better purchasing decisions and get more value for the business. So while doing that, we could see that IaaS was our biggest spend, and I didn't know what this new acronym was, and it stood for Infrastructure as a Service, which effectively is public cloud. So I got in touch with that department, started working with them more closely. There was a cloud business office there where they looked to maximize the company's return on cloud investment. And from there, I kind of fell into FinOps, which is I suppose the cloud is only around since about 2016, and FinOps is only 3-4 years old as a discipline, because I suppose the controls around the spending and the optimizing will always lag the technology. So that's just being kind of stood up now. And in my current role in Spot by NetApp, I work as a cloud optimization consultant, which sounds like something ChatGPT would spit out. But effectively what I do is I work with my customers to maximize the return on their cloud investment by looking at their rate, so using commitment tools to reduce their rate while minimizing the risk of the lock-in from those commitments. So a long way from debits and credits, but yeah.
Cool. Well, Donal, thank you. And well, I suppose one of the things that, as you know, I explained to you, Claire is always in control of the script, and I'm always interested in whether I am procurement guru, procurement guide, procurement person, but I've made guru, which is better than dude. But it also means I get to ask the dumb questions, which is fantastic. Let's start with the basics. What is the cloud, and what is the difference between public and private cloud?
Sure thing. And it's always good to start to set the context. So the cloud, its basic definition is that it's the delivery of computing services over the internet. So if you've got an internet connection, you can access these services. But what it boils down to is it's a box. It's a rack in a data center which has servers stuck in it. Public cloud it's someone else's box in a data center that they own and control. Private cloud it's your own box that you buy, and it's either housed in your own data center or a data center that is run by a third party on your behalf. You might, when you hear about cloud, you might hear terms such as CSP, hyperscaler. Effectively, they're talking about the same thing. They're talking about AWS, Azure, and GCP are the big three public cloud providers. So when you hear that terminology, it's interchangeable. The public cloud is more scalable because I suppose if you need 10 servers, you can just press a button over the internet and you can get 10 servers from these providers. You can scale up quite easy and you just pay for it as you go. If you don't want those anymore, you can just turn them off. Whereas with the private cloud, if you want 10 servers, you raise a rec, you raise your PO, sends off, you get the invoice, the shipping and comes from whoever you've bought it from. So you do have that. It's not as instantaneous. And plus, you've got those 10 boxes, whether you use them or not, the person that sold it to you doesn't care. It's you've made that commitment. So that's the difference between the two.
Cool, thank you.
That's great, Donal. And a cheeky add-on question there is it sounds from what you're saying like, oh, well, you'd logically use public cloud because it's easier to scale and there's less commitment to CapEx. Why might someone choose private cloud? Is it mainly security concerns? What would be the main reason someone would go down the private cloud route?
You're 100% right, Claire. Security concerns would be one aspect of it. While the hyperscalers or the public cloud vendors, their security is obviously top notch because they provide this to masses of customers. You might have your own specific idiosyncrasies for your organization. Maybe it's a data sovereignty thing where it has to live in a certain jurisdiction within a certain country, while the cloud providers will have a footprint in the majority of jurisdictions. Maybe they don't for your one. It could be a data latency thing. So the closer you are to the data center, the quicker it is to spin up and spin down the application. So while you will have a public cloud provider with data centers most places, maybe it's not quite close enough for you. There is, as you mentioned, it seems like a no-brainer in terms of the variable spend model. You just pay as you go. However, the private cloud, if it was a like-for-like basis for steady workload, private cloud tends to be cheaper because if it's a steady state, if you don't need to take advantage of the scalability and the variability of it, it is cheaper to have it in the private cloud as well on a like-for-like workload basis.
Okay, that's a great overview, Donal. Now, when a CTO announces that an organization is moving to the cloud, what do they typically mean and what are the important considerations that should be taken into account? Obviously, we've talked about public and private cloud, but in terms of just transitioning to the cloud, to your earlier point, to actually maximize return on investment and make sure you're not paying for things that you shouldn't be paying for, what are the key considerations?
Great, really good question. And it kind of ties in with what do they mean by say they're moving to the cloud? Because by the earlier definition, you're already kind of in the cloud, you're in your private cloud. So when they generally say moving to the cloud, they're talking about moving to a public cloud provider. And there's rationale for doing this. So we need to understand questions you might want to ask are what are the workloads that are moving. So as we mentioned, if it's a steady state, they refer to it as a monolithic application. So that's something that's not really going to change. Well, that's cheaper to keep in-house than public cloud. Is it an application that changes a lot? So are you a e-commerce vendor and Black Friday and Christmas comes along and you've got massive spikes in your workloads. So therefore it's a use case for a public cloud. So that would be a reason for moving to there. So it's kind of understanding what that balance of workloads, like what's the rationale behind it? You also need to get a picture of if they're moving stuff to the public cloud, are they doing it the right way? There's this concept called lift and shift, where effectively you take the applications that you have in your private cloud and you put it in the public cloud because your public cloud is cheaper. But the way the application is built and constructed works an awful lot different in the public cloud than it does in the private cloud. So you need to take the engineering effort to make that fit for purpose when you move it across. So making sure that the CTO isn't just performing that lift and shift, that they're not just taking everything and moving it, they're making a kind of intentional decision for what they pick and move rather than just moving the whole lot across.
I suppose it's quite similar to when you do an ERP implementation, and companies often try to lift and shift their existing business processes. And Richard's got a great saying for that, haven't you, Richard? Which is you can't put coal in a Tesla.
Steam powered Tesla. Why would you take your steam engine and lift and shift it into a Tesla when the point is you bought a Tesla? So work out how to use the new thing the way the new thing was designed. Don't retro engineer it. And I think, Donal, that's your point. It's just don't assume that what you've got today is either best practice or even usable in a new environment. You've actually got to think about what is it you're going to and adjust to that, right?
There'll also be a balance as well from the CTO perspective in terms of the management. Like if it's a private cloud, there's a lot more care and feeding involved. So you have to do the patching, you have to do the maintenance, security, all that sort of stuff is your responsibility. Whereas the public cloud, a lot of that moves across to the vendor, which is built into the price. But then you have to think about your footprint of resources. Where do they sit and what do they do? So that's kind of you have a lot to consider other than the base applications.
And as is the whole point of the Procurement and Finance Coffee Break, it's not about the CTO or the CFO or the CPO. Everyone's got skin in the game. And I guess, look, Claire, I mean, just what we've just talked about, the sort of that decision to move to private cloud. I mean, what if you put your CFO hat on, what are the things you're thinking about when we've made a decision that we're going to do that? We're going to move to the private cloud.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a CFO perspective, you'd be thinking about if you're moving to private cloud, significant CapEx expenditure up front. However, one benefit of that is that if you're spending CapEx, you'll be depreciating that CapEx, and one measure of performance, which is meant to be equated roughly to the cash flow of business, is EBITDA. So depreciation would effectively fall below the line in terms of a cost hitting EBITDA, because it's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization. So you've got the cash flow aspect to think about. Okay, well, I need the cash is going to hit the balance sheet, but then potentially you might think, oh well, for whatever reason, I would prefer that to come as an expense in the P&L after EBITDA. However, if you were paying for a service that perhaps was not private cloud, and you wasn't spending CapEx, and it was sort of infrastructure as a service or software as a service, that's likely to be hitting your P&L higher up. So I think realistically that's just optics, and a good CFO should be able to explain those optics, especially if you're in the position where your business is being benchmarked to another business and you're saying, well, why is their EBITDA better than yours? And you're like, well, that's because for whatever reason we've decided that public cloud is better, maybe for the reasons you've mentioned, Donal, that maybe you're a retail business with high fluctuations in demand, or maybe you're just a very fast growing company and is it's a more flexible solution. But I think those are the things you need to consider. You need to consider, like, what's your cash flow? Do you have the cash on hand to invest in private cloud and a large CapEx program or not?
That's a really good point, Claire, because a lot of startups, when they begin, historically, their first rounds of funding would have gone to buy a load of servers and the software to run those. Whereas now the cost of failure is less because you can just spin up those applications, run it for a while, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work and you just shut it down. Whereas before you'd have this data center and these servers that you've paid for and you're not sure if it's going to pay off, but you've shelled out for them. So it does. And then you have those new businesses when they do reach a certain level of scale. That's maybe when they have to think about that repatriation piece of, do I then move my steady state element into my private cloud? I'm big enough now to have my own footprint, and I leave the variable piece on top in the public cloud and have that hybrid model.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point, because I guess you don't have to be one or the other. I guess you could have a hybrid model.
Well, look, I'm gonna wade in now with the CPO's perspective, because actually they're fundamentally different, and I think the outcome may well be the same. The availability of infrastructure to support whatever environments you wish to run. But if you think about it in three big steps, one is fundamentally a CapEx investment, private cloud. The other is essentially an OpEx investment. You're buying a scalable thing which is delivered as a service. Once you've realized that key difference, there's two things. Being blunt, if you're going public cloud and you're going OpEx, you can be a bit more relaxed about your requirements, because if you don't get quite the number of servers correct, you can adjust it. If you don't quite get the environment, you can adjust it. And you haven't got to think about how that fits in the operating budget of the business. If you're going private cloud, you are going to nail that requirement down, because you're making an investment not just in physical servers, but probably in physical environments, buildings, whether it's actually on premise or whether it's in a third party site. And of course, you're going to have the OpEx implication of run cost, which will just be part of the CTO, CIO's budget. Then you've got to come to the things that you forget about: sustainability and data. Geographically, where is your data going to go? Public cloud, you might not have, you do have a say, but there are risks. Private cloud, you know exactly where your data is hosted, and depending on who your customers are, that might be more of an issue than you think. And in terms of sustainability, one of the big impacts of any data center is the energy consumption. And if it's private cloud, you've got a say in the energy that's used to run it. You might even have your own on-premise solar, wind, hydro that does it for you. If you're going public cloud, you pretty much have got no control over how they are powering that data center. So you might find you lose control of your CO2 simply because you've got a bad phrase, dirty data center, a public cloud that's running off hydrocarbon energy. So fundamentally, and then last point, sorry, the agreement. If you're doing infrastructure, private cloud, you're going to have a great big contract with good old, clauses on installations, money, maintaining, blah, blah, blah. Anyone who's ever touched an agreement, with Amazon or others knows that your ability to change the agreement from the standard agreement is about zero unless you're a huge company. So you will get handed fairly standard SLAs in terms of uptime, availability, throughput, all of that good stuff, but you can't really tailor it. You're literally buying a service and you'll get that service, which by the way is very good. And I think one of the things that when people were making the first decision to go from on-prem to cloud, there was a lot of nervousness of, well, we're not in control. How do we know that you're going to deliver? I think the evidence over the past 5, 6, 7 years has more than demonstrated that public cloud environments provided by any of those big three are high performing environments, but they come at a cost, and I suspect we'll talk about that in a bit. But fundamentally different approaches depending on which route you're going down, which is important to understand. So right, where are we? Donal, I'm going to
Sorry,
ask.
Richard, I'll just pick up on 2 points you make there that are really, really good. One is around the sustainability piece. Like this within FinOps, there's a concept called Green Ops, which is looking at the CO2 emission calculation of your workloads and your environment. And the data from the cloud providers is not good. It's really, they don't take into account scope 3. It's really high level. They are aware of it and they are doing taking efforts around it. For example, it's only this morning I read that AWS have bought a data center and associated nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania, I think it's about 650 billion or million. I know there's a big difference. One of those. Anyways,
an accountant, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
Zeros.
What's 3 extra zeros? So it is something they're conscious of, and they're kind of moving towards. But possibly the more important thing is around control within your own P&L and balance sheet. And as you mentioned, when you're going private cloud, you've got your colo agreement, you're buying your servers, you're negotiating each and every one of those. So you've got a couple of points at which to make those negotiations and make bespoke agreements on your behalf. From an accounting point of view as well, you have control because the business case and the ROI, you need to do those projections. Whereas when it comes to public cloud, it's the engineers and the architects at the edge of the organization are writing lines of code, which is spinning up new machines, which is costing you money per second. So while public cloud scalability and flexibility is amazing, the ability for it to run out of control is also there, and the potential for tech debt as well. Whereas if you've got tech debt in a data center, which tech debt is essentially old infrastructure that you paid for that you're not really using. Like if you're tripping over a server in a room every day or walking past, you're like, geez, I really need to get a workload to put in there. Whereas if it's some engineer who's a fully remote employee who's left the business, has everything that they've been working on previously been shut down and spun down, or is it still there? So that because the sprawl of the public cloud is so excessive, then trying to get a handle on that is why FinOps has started as a discipline, because every time you get your CUR, which is your cost and usage report, which is your itemized bill, it is thousands of lines wide and millions of lines long, even for a small environment. So trying to make sense of all that and trying to unpick that tech debt and have that level of control in a really variable environment is really tricky, because it's kind of closing the gate after the horse is bolted, because you're on the clock. Time is literally money. Whereas CapEx, you can say, okay, guys, we're going to hold off on this until we get all the gates cleared. It's engineers and architects are like, they will do the right thing by the company, but it's free reign to a degree.
I suppose to complete the trilogy, CPO, CFO's view, but when we're talking about private cloud, what's the main concern or responsibilities that sit with the CTO when they're looking at a private cloud option?
The CTO always has a trade-off between speed. It's called the iron triangle. So it's like, it can be faster, it can be cheap, or it could be fast, expensive, or I forget what the other one is. Something along, another nice thing to have anyways.
Quality movie.
So they want to empower engineers and architects to make decisions quickly, which would point to the public cloud. However, they need to maintain control, so that would be your private cloud. So their risks and their thoughts with private cloud is, are they striking that balance between the right level of utilization? Do I have enough servers in my private data center, or have I bought too many? Can I hit those peaks when we talked about the Black Friday piece? Do I order for my maximum workloads on Black Friday, or do I order for the lower level and let my customers deal with latency? And you've also got that kind of ongoing management, that care and feeding piece of the private cloud. Like, say you've got contracts coming up with colos, with servers, and even if you are moving from one to another, if you're locked into a 5 or 10-year deal with a co-location, so what's your exit strategy there from a procurement point of view? That if you did want to move to the public cloud, when's my next off ramp? So you need to take those. So you're right, Richard. They need to be hand in glove, the CFO, the CPO, and the CTO, because the decision can't be made in isolation, because there's so many moving parts.
I want to ask Donal. I want to ask you a practical question, which is, I guess it's thinking about what are the financial and procurement implications of a CFO and CPO, but realistically, I want to ask you a situation that I'm sure many financial controllers and FDs have been in. They've moved to public cloud, and they're getting a bill in for public cloud, but they don't understand the bill. The bill means nothing. I mean, so what do they do? Because I think that'd be a really useful tip for our listeners, because
And or the worst thing is they get onto their rep and they ask for the detail, and it's like drinking from the fire hose, because there is so much data that you can't necessarily make sense of it. There are you have a number of options. There are a number of managed service providers that offer, if you're a smaller company and you want to outsource an element of this, you're like, it's something I would get to eventually, but I can't right now, and I know I'm wasting money, because there's I don't know who had this survey, but about 30% of all cloud spend is waste.
No, really, 30%.
Yeah,
That's quite
yeah.
high.
So, and if it's a big bill and a growing bill, that number gets to a point where you really start paying attention. So you can either get maybe a managed service provider to assist with managing your cloud bill, or you could hire an in-house FinOps person. So that'd be someone who would look at the two main levers, like anything in procurement and finance. Either you can pay less for it or buy less of it. So rate optimization would be where you look at commitment mechanisms to get discounts on your usage. That's what I do all day. So I just focus on that rate optimization piece. It's low hanging fruit because there's no engineering effort. You're just buying these discount mechanisms that sit in your environment. So that's one element. The other element then is usage optimization. That's shutting off things that you're not using. So is the box that your workload is running on too big? Make it smaller. Pay less. And I suppose the usage optimization is more of an impact from a CO2 perspective as well, Richard, as you mentioned. Like that's where the real compound improvement comes, but it can't just be a one and done, because it's like anything. You fix it, you get in a big consulting effort, and you optimize all your environment for usage optimization, and then the consultant or whoever it is leaves, and 1 week later you're back in the same place again. So it needs to be a continuous iterative process, because the technology is changing all the time as well.
I've got a very quick last question for you. I'm going to butt in before Claire does one of her wonderful summaries. I mean, what you've described is actually a bit of a shift of role for the CTO, from being, from worrying about whether the data center's working and the stress of their life, to worrying about whether they are using what they're paying for, to make sure they haven't got that, people haven't just got carried away and spun up 55 test environments and then just left them spinning. Which, trust me, we've seen that. I mean, just a couple of things that I've heard talking to clients is, big companies, they've been on public cloud for a while, and I'm just beginning to hear the beginnings of noises of people bringing it back to private cloud and taking it out of public cloud. I mean, is that something that you've detected? And, whether you have or not, I mean, what would you think, just briefly, do you think might be the main reason for that?
Yeah, it's definitely something we're seeing a lot of in the echo chamber of FinOps. Everyone's always up in arms when there's a talk of people repatriating to private cloud, because obviously it's a kind of direct correlation to what we do. But there's probably two main reasons for the move back. One would be that probably those workloads shouldn't have been in the cloud in the first place. So it goes back to the lift and shift element we spoke about. They would have just, not like that coal and Tesla piece, they just chucked all the coal into Tesla, because everyone was cloud first. We need to migrate to the cloud to be up with the modern technology, without refactoring, but just changing their application to make it right. That's probably the main driver. The second driver then is probably smaller businesses that have scaled to a certain point, and now they're looking at repatriating those steady state workloads back into the private cloud, where it is more cost effective for your applications, your monolithic ones that don't really change a whole pile. So it's getting that balance right. There is a sweet spot, but as you mentioned earlier, Claire, probably a mix of the both is where you want to go, but it's having that skill set within the team to manage both, having a procurement department to support that, having a finance person that gets the integration between a P&L and a balance sheet and how both impact as that split changes.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Donal. And I guess on that note, I was just thinking, there's lots of sort of, I guess, small to mid-cap companies where perhaps they don't have the bandwidth internally to perhaps hire a FinOps lead, or have the capabilities in-house to sort of manage that. Is that where you would say, well, go look for a managed service provider who will continually look to optimize your cloud usage for you? Is that something that's more beneficial to sort of smaller to mid-cap companies?
Yes, yeah, it probably, it's a large investment to get someone in specifically for a small environment, to get someone that knows what they're doing. It can always be a case of the CFO says to the CTO, my cloud bill is rising, what's going on? Or like, oh, I hired a FinOps person there for 45 grand a year, and that's that sorted. But that person needs to be empowered, they need to have buy-in to go to engineers, they need to have experience to know what they're looking for. Not everyone can do that and hire a buy-in.
Yes.
So,
and also I thought just having the know-how to know what you're looking for in a FinOps lead might not be there in the first place. So it's all very well saying just go and hire someone, but you might not feel that that's something that you know how to recruit or what might be appropriate.
Yeah, and the low-hanging fruit is the rate optimization piece. It's kind of getting those commitments, like you'll hear about savings plans, reserved instances, those kind of things. But again, you want to buy the right thing. It's and there is an element of knowledge here. There's a shameless plug now, but that's pretty much what we do in Spot. We manage that rate optimization piece, but for someone to have a more holistic view of that usage optimization piece and the rate optimization, it would be more of a managed service provider piece would be the way to go.
Okay, well, thanks, Donal. Thanks for your time. It's been very enlightening discussion, and I'm sure it's something that lots of CFOs and CPOs have been grappling with over the last few years. So, what's on the agenda for the next Procurement and Finance Coffee Break, Richard? Have we decided?
Well, no. Have you told me?
No, I haven't.
I'm a realist. I don't think it is, but we want to do more of these. So look, if you're watching it, it doesn't matter what your topic is in a business context. Donal very much put it. Technology is a CPO, CFO, CTO, and a bit of people officer as well. Frankly, get together to sort the problem. It's the same anywhere. So look, if you're passionate about what you do in business and you want to bring it to life with us in the context of finance procurement, get in touch. Otherwise, I have to talk about what Claire wants.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Donal, for your time. And that's all for this week's Finance and Procurement Coffee Break. See, do you like how I switched it to finance in the Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care. Thanks, Donal. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.